Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Let me begin then by just saying a little bit about the changes that we're seeing. We're seeing, I think, a radical change in English education, with nearly half of our secondary schools and a growing number of primary and special schools have become academies. Free schools, UTCs, studio schools are emerging too. So it's really a new educational landscape, and it's, I think, developing with astonishing rapidity. The rapid expansion is a result, as you know, of the government's decision to encourage many schools to convert easily to academy status, and its decision to expand the sponsored programme into primary schools. And as of the 1st of April, there were 1,776 academies, a huge increase from the 270 or so that had been open or planned at the time of the last election. So the scale, I think, and the speed of change are really unprecedented, and there couldn't be a more important time, really, to explore the implications and the likely impact of the expansion. That's why the RSA and Pearson have established the Commission, and why I was delighted to be invited to chair it. So this is the first in a series of speed commissions that the RSA was intending to run, and the idea is to look at key public policy issues over a very quick period of time, no more than 8 or 9 months, by focusing on the most overarching questions. So that's why what we're discussing with you today is really key. So today's launch focuses on really two key questions, two principal questions. What are the implications of a complete academisation for school improvement and pupil achievement? That's the first one. And how can improvement and achievement best be secured within such a system? You'll see immediately the issues of accountability run through both of those questions. And from those two questions, the commissioners have pulled out 5 others to put flesh on the bones, really, of those. So the first one is looking at the levers and barriers to school improvement. How can achievement be secured for all pupils within such a system? So we want to look at different approaches to school improvement and their fit within what is an increasingly autonomous system. Inevitably, that will lead us to think about collaboration, about competition between schools. We'll look at the different practices of federations and chains over the last few years, the difference between sponsored and converter academies. We'll look at new and emerging models of profession-led improvement, such as challenge partners, where outstanding schools are challenging themselves to do better, at the same time working with other schools who need more intensive support. We'll be considering the role of Ofsted and inspection, and I always believed inspection should be a support for improvement, and the evidence that Ofsted itself collects suggests that 9 out of 10 continue to see it that way. But outstanding schools, including many converter academies, are no longer subject to routine inspection. What does that mean for public accountability and indeed the information provided to parents about each school's current effectiveness? We'll be looking at the role of local authorities and new models of collaboration that may emerge. Recently, I've been really fortunate to visit a number of the newly designated teaching schools up and down the country. Collaboration for improvement is absolutely at the core of their work. Is it the sort of model that's going to displace the traditional local authority role in school improvement? Or will there be more chains led by individual academies or federating groups of them, or even bigger chains? It is clear to me as I go up and down the country that many authorities are struggling to adapt to the new educational landscape, and budget reductions have led to reductions in school improvement services. Most local authorities that are thinking about their role in the new landscape see themselves as championing the needs, the interests of children and young people in their area, and of commissioning services for them rather than providing those services. What does this mean for school improvement at whole system level? If we're looking at improvement, we will have to do some work on the link between the Academy's programme and attainment and progress. Now, as most of you will be aware, it's notoriously difficult to make comparison, but we will examine the evidence about achievement. So we will look, for instance, at successful academies which have been highly successful to see if we can unpick the reasons for that success. Robert Hill's recent study for the National College pointed to a number of factors that we might want, but we want to go further than that. So we might want to compare, for instance, the pattern of success in the most successful chains with a success in an area like Tower Hamlets, which last year achieved well above the national average at GCSE without any academies at all. The second issue really is focusing on freedoms, why are academies not really using their full freedoms. I looked at a recent survey of 470 academies by Reform in the Schools Network, and at the time they conducted the survey, that was a third of all academies responding to it. And they asked them a number of questions about why they became academies, the extent to which they were using academy freedoms to innovate to improve performance, and whether giving schools more autonomy was sufficient to drive improvement. It was clear that the majority of academies converted for financial reasons or to achieve greater educational autonomy. Many seem not to be using the freedoms that come with their new status. This is particularly interesting, I think, as part of the original rationale for academies that was that innovation would lead to improved practice, and that would lead it to improve outcomes for children and young people. So we're really keen to look at particular examples where the use of freedoms has indeed accelerated school improvement and led to better pupil outcomes, to see if that does have lessons at whole system level. We're also interested in considering whether the practice in some chains has actually led to less freedom for schools at individual level. And it may be too that the differences that we know are there, or beginning to emerge anyway, between sponsored and converted academies will be key here, and we might, in the time frame of this work, be able to see the impact of this over the next few months. The third one is about admissions. What are the implications of an academised system on admissions? And this has to be, I think, a key focus as we look to the future. We took evidence, very helpful evidence, just a week ago actually, from Anne West, Professor Anne West. Her research focuses on education policy, in particular market-oriented reforms, school admissions and equity, and on the financing of school-based education. And one of the key things that we want to explore is whether the adherence to the admissions code is clear in practice as it is clear in theory. And we want to spend some time exploring the issue to make sure that the interests of all children are in fact being protected. Some academies have used admissions to achieve a more comprehensive intake, and we'll look at the role of banding, perhaps even lotteries in doing this, and to see who benefits from those changes. We are keen in particular to look at the experience of looked after children, children in care, and different pupil groups, for instance, children and young people with special educational needs. Professor West's evidence has also reinforced the need for the Commission to look at issues of transparency about the whole admission process. The fourth area is the impact of diversification and academisation on existing academies and schools. Even if half of our secondary schools are academies, or almost half, fewer than 5% of primaries have gone down this route. What are the implications for those that remain as maintained schools? Equally, we want to look at how the local market is being managed and the related issues around the choice agenda, including the development of new academies and free schools. Who should be responsible for ensuring there is good local provision for every child or young person will be part of our deliberations. And that'll obviously touch on discussions about the role of the Secretary of State, about any new or mediating or middle tier. I'm really increasingly persuaded as I go up and down the country and go into schools that we've reached a tipping point in favour of schools, school leaders and indeed teachers themselves as the primary drivers of systemic improvement. And I'm keen to explore a range of models about how that potential might ensure support for every school in the country without the introduction of a new layer of bureaucracy. The governing body has a leadership role enshrined in legislation for over 30 years to give strategic direction, to act as a critical friend and to ensure accountability. How is this working in our academies? Models are emerging which show different approaches to governance, and these can be seen in developments in a range of alliances, federations and chains, and some are said to be generating stronger internal and external accountability. Robert Hill's work in the last piece, but also in 2010, reported smaller and more focused governing bodies in some of the chains. Now, part of the improvement he describes stems from a clear distinction between a strategic direction exercised generally at chain level and more operational accountability exercised at school level. We're also exploring in this section how different models of governance interact with issues of resource accountability. We also want to look more broadly at the role of the sponsor and the differences in the way they're interpreting their accountabilities, and there are differences. We shall explore how sponsors are selected, what happens if a relationship breaks down, what happens when a sponsored chain fails to ensure improvement. So that was a quick run through. Those are the key 5 questions that we want to pose. We want to see and to hear evidence, particularly from the front line, to seek answers to questions. So please do respond to the call for evidence that's out from today and on the web from today. We're not naive. We do know that many of these issues are going to be controversial, not least to some of you sitting in the room. But we do hope by at least looking at these questions, discussing these questions and hearing the evidence, we can identify ways to ensure that the Academy's programme is indeed successful in delivering improvements that benefit every child and young person and in raising educational standards for all. Thank you very much.